Before the awards, before Hollywood, before the Grammy, before the red carpets and worldwide recognition, there was simply a young man from Chicago with a dream and a notebook full of rhymes. His name was Lonnie Rashid Lynn Jr., but the world would eventually know him as Common. Growing up in Chicago, he discovered that words could become more than just words. They could become a voice, an identity, and a way to tell the story of the world around him. While the spotlight seemed impossibly far away, Common kept writing, performing, learning, and searching for his own sound in a hip-hop culture filled with powerful personalities. He wasn't trying to become the loudest rapper in the room. He was trying to become the most authentic version of himself. But what happened next would change everything. From Chicago's neighborhoods and underground hip-hop scene to critically acclaimed albums, major collaborations, Hollywood films, Grammy recognition, and an Academy Award, Common's journey would prove that you don't need to start with fame to build a legacy. You just need a voice, the courage to use it, and the determination to keep going when nobody knows your name. But how did that young Chicago dreamer actually become one of hip-hop's most respected artists? And what struggles, risks, and turning points were waiting for him along the way? This is the story of Common, the journey from a young man with a dream to a rap star whose voice would eventually reach far beyond Chicago. To understand Common's rise, you have to go back to Chicago, long before the awards, the movie roles, and the global recognition. Born Lonnie Rashid Lynn Jr. in 1972, Common grew up on Chicago's South Side in a family that gave him both discipline and encouragement. His father, Lonnie Lynn Sr., had a connection to professional basketball, while his mother, Mahalia Ann Hines, was an educator. And that combination helped shape a young man who would eventually become known not only for his talent, but for the way he thought about the world. Chicago itself became an important part of his identity. It was a city filled with music, culture, creativity, ambition, and serious challenges. And as Common grew older, he began observing everything around him. He wasn't simply listening to what people were saying, he was paying attention to how people lived, how they struggled, how they dreamed, and how they expressed themselves. Then hip-hop entered the picture, and for Common, it became more than just music. It became a language through which he could turn his observations into stories. While other young artists were trying to imitate the biggest names of the era, Common slowly began developing a style that felt personal. He started writing rhymes, performing, and building his confidence in Chicago's growing hip-hop scene, initially performing under the name Common Sense. But this wasn't an overnight transformation. There were no packed arenas waiting for him, no guaranteed record deal, and certainly no promise that he would become famous. He had to earn every bit of attention. Small performances, underground recognition, endless writing sessions, and the constant pressure to prove himself became part of his early journey. And this is where Common's story becomes interesting, because he wasn't trying to create a fake image just to fit into hip-hop. He was searching for his own voice. He wanted his music to reflect what he saw and what he believed, and that meant taking a different path from many of the artists around him. His rhymes could be intelligent, playful, personal, and socially aware, but they still carried the energy of hip-hop. Slowly, people began noticing that there was something different about this young Chicago rapper. He wasn't simply chasing attention, he was building an identity. By the early 1990s, that identity was strong enough to lead to his first major opportunity, the release of his debut album, Can I Borrow a Dollar? In 1992. The project introduced listeners to an artist who was still developing, but already had personality and a distinctive approach to lyricism. It wasn't the beginning of instant superstardom, but it was the beginning of something much bigger. For Common, the goal was no longer simply to be another young rapper from Chicago. He had started to realize that his words could take him somewhere far beyond the neighborhood where his journey began. But getting noticed was only the first battle. The real challenge was figuring out how to turn that early attention into a lasting career, and that would require Common to take an even bigger risk, becoming completely comfortable with being different. But here's where Common's story starts getting really interesting. Before the Grammy, before Hollywood, and before millions of people knew his name, Common was already moving through the same Chicago hip-hop world that would eventually produce some of the biggest names in music. And the wild part? Some of the people he crossed paths with during those early years would later become legends themselves. Common wasn't walking into the industry as an established superstar. He was still a young rapper trying to prove that his voice deserved a place at the table. One of the most important early connections in his journey was his relationship with fellow Chicago artists and the growing local hip-hop community. Chicago had its own sound, its own energy, and its own underground network, and Common was right in the middle of it. He was learning who was serious, who was talented, who could really write, and who was simply chasing attention. But Common's biggest advantage wasn't that he knew famous people. It was that he was becoming respected by people who understood hip-hop. His name began circulating among artists, DJs, producers, and fans who recognized that this wasn't just another rapper looking for a quick moment. He had something deeper. Then came one of the most important relationships of his career, his connection with No ID, the Chicago producer who would become one of Common's closest creative collaborators. Before No ID became known as one of the most influential producers in hip-hop, he and Common were young Chicago creatives trying to figure out how to turn ideas into records. Their partnership became a major part of Common's early development, helping him create a sound that felt distinctly Chicago, while still connecting with the wider hip-hop audience. And then there was another legendary name who would eventually enter Common's story in a much bigger way: Kanye West. But here's the twist: Kanye wasn't always the superstar we know today. Before the stadium tours, fashion empire, massive headlines, and global fame, Kanye was a hungry Chicago producer trying to get his beats heard. Common and Kanye eventually connected through Chicago's music scene, and their creative relationship would become one of the most important collaborations in Common's career. But at that early stage, neither man could know exactly how far the other would go. They were simply two Chicago artists with ambition, surrounded by a culture that demanded originality. Kanye's soulful production style and Common's thoughtful lyricism eventually proved to be a powerful combination, but the relationship was built over time, not overnight. And Common's connections didn't stop there. As his reputation grew, he became part of a wider circle of artists who were redefining what hip-hop could sound like. Names like Q-Tip, De La Soul, The Roots, Mos Def, Talib Kweli, Erykah Badu, and the Soulquarians would become connected to the artistic world Common was entering. Suddenly, this young rapper from Chicago wasn't just fighting for attention in his hometown, he was becoming part of a larger creative movement. But what makes this chapter so fascinating is that Common wasn't meeting these artists from the position of a superstar. He was meeting them while he was still proving himself. He had to walk into rooms where nobody owed him respect and make people remember his name. And that is exactly what made the relationships powerful. These weren't simply celebrity friendships for the cameras. They were creative connections built around music, ideas, and a shared belief that hip-hop could be something more than just a competition for who sounded the toughest. Common was discovering that the right people around you can completely change the direction of your career. But there was still one major problem. Being respected by artists wasn't the same as becoming a star. Common had the talent, the connections, and the growing reputation. But could he turn all of that into a breakthrough that would force the entire industry to pay attention? That question would soon become impossible to ignore. But behind the rising rapper, there was also a young Common experiencing something far more personal: his first real taste of love. Long before the fame, the Hollywood romances, and the headlines about his relationships with famous women, Common was simply a young man trying to understand relationships while chasing his dream in music. His early romantic life was largely kept away from the spotlight, and that makes this chapter different from the glamorous love stories people hear about celebrities today. There were no cameras following him, no paparazzi waiting outside restaurants, and no headlines turning every relationship into breaking news. He was still building his name, writing rhymes, performing, and trying to figure out where hip-hop could take him. Like many young people, Common experienced the excitement, uncertainty, and emotions that come with first love, and those experiences became part of the person and storyteller he was becoming. At that point, nobody knew whether this young Chicago rapper would become a household name. He didn't have millions of fans or superstar status. He was still chasing a dream that could easily have remained just a dream. And perhaps that's what makes this period so interesting. Before Common became the man everyone recognized, he was just Lonnie, experiencing love, heartbreak, ambition, and growing up like everyone else. Those early emotions would eventually influence the thoughtful, vulnerable side of his music, proving that sometimes the stories that shape an artist's heart happen long before the world knows their name. And when you look at Common's journey today, it's almost hard to believe where it started. Before the awards, before Hollywood, before the Grammy and Oscar, before the famous collaborations and millions of fans, there was simply a young man from Chicago with a notebook, a dream, and a voice he refused to silence. He didn't become a rap star overnight. He built his career through years of writing, performing, experimenting, meeting other hungry artists, learning from every opportunity, and slowly discovering exactly who he wanted to be. Along the way, he experienced friendship, love, disappointment, ambition, and the pressure of trying to make a name for himself in an industry filled with competition. But instead of allowing those experiences to stop him, he turned them into fuel for his art. That's what makes Common's story so powerful. His greatest achievement isn't just becoming famous, it's proving that you can evolve without losing yourself. The young Chicago rapper became a respected lyricist, then a major recording artist, then an actor, songwriter, and Academy Award winner. But underneath all those accomplishments is the same person who once dreamed about making his voice heard. His journey reminds us that sometimes success doesn't arrive when you expect it, and the people who start with you aren't always the people who finish the journey with you. What matters is continuing to grow, continuing to create, and continuing to believe in the vision when nobody else can see it yet. So now I want to hear from you. What do you think was the biggest turning point in Common's journey? From his Chicago beginnings, to his breakthrough in hip-hop, to his rise into Hollywood? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next celebrity journey. Because behind every superstar is a beginning that most people never saw, and sometimes the most powerful part of the story isn't where the celebrity ended up. It's where they started.